All right, so now we are on to the final two speakers for this solution section. And Jim Bucknell is with RH2 Engineering, but Jim's another person that's been working on water issues for a long, long time in this county, both for Department of Ecology and for how many years recently with RH13 with RH2 Engineering, and he still hasn't retired yet. But he's cutting back his hours, so we need to take advantage of him while we can, while he's here. And Jim is also, Jim's going to be talking about a whole assortment of what we're calling exploring new solutions that he's been involved with and is aware of. And he's making the bold move of not having a PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to see how this goes. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Sue. Sorry about spilling the water earlier, but I got mine. And so in the illustration of first in time, first and right, here we go. So a little water geek joke there. So thanks, everybody. I want to thank the organizing committee for putting this all together, because I've touched base with them some while they were doing all this, and the amount of work that they've done is amazing. So good job to all of you. So I want to start by clarifying something that will become even more clear as I speak, and that is that I'm not a fish biologist and I'm not a scientist. What I am is a guy that has been doing water resources stuff for about 40 years, and yeah, I started when I was 12. And, and so an important caveat that I do want to put out, and this is serious, these are my ideas. I work for RH2 Engineering, but they are not RH2 Engineering's ideas. Nobody else in our company has even seen this presentation. These are my ideas and mine alone. If you like them, great. If you don't, you can blame me. All I can tell you about them is they are ideas. There will be some good ones and some bad ones, and you can be the judge of that, but they are my ideas. You've probably all heard the quote attributed to Albert Einstein about you can't fix today's problems thinking the same way we thought about them in getting here. And I think that applies a bit to what I'm going to talk about today. I've come up with another one in working on water resources for 40 years, and that is these issues are inherently complicated. You can only make them so simple. But sometimes I think there's no limit to how hard we can make them. And so we need to try to focus on not doing that if we can. I found another quotation that I liked. It doesn't really apply today particularly, but it kind of relates to Greg Eby's comment about being optimistic. And I just liked it. It's a positive attitude, may not solve all your problems, but it will annoy enough people to make it worth the effort. So with that, I'll cheerfully move ahead. So I'm not going to talk much about the current setting. We all know that there's conflicting water uses. Nobody's wrong, but we just have conflicting uses for water at certain times and certain places. And of course, all that with the setting of the Lummies and Nooksacks and their tribal rights, and trying to figure out how to make this work for everybody. In my opinion, we need to get to a point that the Nooksack River consistently provides the harvestable surplus of salmon that we heard about earlier. We need to provide water for out-of-stream uses, and we need to make our water use as resilient to climate change as we possibly can. So any questions? Okay, thanks. So we've also heard a little bit about in Skagit County, we had the Swinomish case, which was a water rights case that dealt with the overriding considerations of the public interest. And the result was it's very hard, if not impossible, to drill a well and get a building permit. Similarly, in Whatcom County, we have the Hearst case, which is a Growth Management Act case, but the results are very much the same. It's very hard to drill a well and get a building permit for new development. And then on top of those, we have the Foster v. Ecology case, which makes it extremely hard to mitigate for those wells, even if you can try to explore mitigation options. So that leaves me to the case, to the situation where, given existing laws, statutes, regulations, court cases, and policies, what can we do about the current water situation? And my answer is not much. And I may be overly optimistic about that. But that really seems to be the case, because a lot of people have tried a lot of different things and nothing seems to move. But if we can ask a different question, if we can ask the question, what could we do about the current water situation? I think the answer becomes, and the discussion becomes a lot more interesting. So the difference is how we deal with the existing constraints. Do we take them as absolute impermeable barriers, to borrow a term from the hydrogeologist, or do we say, well, that's a problem, we're going to have to see if we can get around that, see if we can get over that hurdle. And I would argue that that's what we need to focus on. Jay mentioned earlier the prior appropriation doctrine and how we've had that for 100 years, and that maybe if we were setting it up now, we wouldn't do it quite that way. I was involved in all honesty, I was involved with the establishment of the in-stream flow rule in this basin when I was at Ecology. That was 32 years ago, and thanks for the math correction, because I said 22 earlier. I think it made sense then, but similar to what Jay said, if we were doing it again, probably would do it differently because of what we learned about hydraulic continuity and a variety of other things. So my goal today is to talk about what could we do, and so the recurring theme of my presentation is what if? What if we did this? What if we did this? And I just encourage you all to think about these things. Some of them you may just dismiss out of hand. Some of them you may go, maybe. They'll certainly be fraught with political and financial and other difficulties, but I think there's a lot of things here. This is sort of my brain dump of slim pickings as it may be about what I think could be done. First of all, I want to there are a lot of things going on already, and you heard Gary refer to the comprehensive water plan, and that's not a real specific process yet, but there's a lot of activities going on that parts of which will feed into the development of a comprehensive water plan for the county. We did the coordinated water system plan. I worked for the county at RH2. I was the project manager for that. And then I also worked on the quantification of agricultural irrigation water rights for the PUD. And those were both have elements that would be included in an overall water supply plan. The conference sponsors asked me to address 4 areas of potential water supply solutions. They are the redistribution of water, creative management of existing water, which is talking about water banks or water exchanges, large-scale water reuse, and habitat and water quality improvements. And you'll see as I talk that some of these overlap with each other, but I will try to break them into those general categories. So when we did the coordinated water system plan, we looked at the Department of Health's database, and we looked at existing water systems, and we looked at their current water use per connection, the number of connections, their future build-out, their future demand, and then compared it to their water rights. And we identified systems that had, and we've seen some of the maps earlier today, so we identified systems that have enough water to do build-out. We have ranging from that to meet future build-out to a surplus of water to systems that don't have enough water right now. They're already violating their water rights. And I would suggest that we should use that information to start a process, use the CWSP as a basis for identifying where we can put interties, where we can install interties between public water systems to increase the resiliency to drought and resiliency to climate change and resolve some of their water right problems. And I think there's a possibility then of going, for example, to the legislature or through Ecology or Department of Health to try to get funding to help with some of those things. The Delta water system was identified as a system that's currently exceeding its rights. Dan Isis talked about the possibility of the deep well aquifers that they're exploring being a potential solution for that. I won't go into detail, but I think that's a great example of a kind of a problem or kind of a project where we could provide new water supplies to really resolve some long-standing issues. So what if we use the CWSP to foster the development of public water system interties? And then there's a bunch of other redistribution projects that I'd invite you to think about. Again, my ideas, nobody else's. PUD number 1 has a 5 CFS water right in the lower river that's been verified by Ecology as a water right in good standing. So what if the PUD, and I also understand that the City of Bellingham has expressed some interest in potentially having a point of withdrawal downstream for water use in the future, to take water out of the lower river. So what if, again, there's that question, what if the PUD and the city swap 5 CFS of water right. So the city gets a 5 CFS water right at Ferndale. The PUD gets a 5 CFS water right at the Middle Fork. The PUD then files a water right change application to move that water down to the Linden area. And you take it out there and you either use it to help Linden with its water supply problems, or you use it to hydrate Fish Trap and Bertrand and the other tributary streams in the area. I think from a water rights standpoint, that's a pretty clean operation. It obviously involves the participation and agreement of the parties, the PUD and the city, but I think from a water rights standpoint, that's a doable operation. That water then that's flowing down the Middle Fork to the Linden area could be put in trust as an in-stream flow right, so it would be protected during that reach of the river. And then when it gets to the Linden area, as I said, it could be provided to Linden customers, or it could be used for other uses, including mitigation for permit-exempt wells in the area, and stream flow augmentation. Another alternative, because it's expensive to treat that water and put it out into the area, is to split the water line when it comes off the river, provide perhaps some to Linden or maybe none to Linden, and move it out through new infrastructure up to the border and use that to rehydrate the streams and improve in-stream flows and habitat. So then what if that movement of water downstream from the Middle Fork were accomplished in a different way? What if we split the city's Middle Fork diversion at the South Fork and allowed the city water to be put into the South Fork to help with in-stream flows and temperature in the South Fork when it's more important there than it is in the Middle Fork? Again, fishery biologists will tell us if there is such a time and if that's feasible. But that would then, you could also protect that water with a trust water right and move it downstream. And then Bellingham's water right, when I was still at Ecology, we modified their right to allow them to produce hydropower when there was a domestic need for or a municipal supply water need for the water. So they couldn't just divert water from the Middle Fork and generate hydropower, but when there was a demand for the water from the Middle Fork, they could generate hydro. So what if we modified their water right to allow them to generate hydro either when there was municipal water supply or there's a need for the water in the South Fork? So again, things to think about. From an infrastructure standpoint, that's not a terribly difficult problem to do.
You keep touching the screen.
Oh, sorry. Ignore that.
Let's leave it there.
Okay. I'll hold my notes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what if then we decide, okay, how are we going to decide when we're going to use that water from the South Fork? When's it going to go down the Middle Fork? When's it going to go to the South Fork? I would suggest that a management group consisting of the City of Bellingham and the fishery co-managers, which are defined as the two tribes, the Lummi Nation, the Nooksack tribe, and the Washington Department of Fisheries, should be fully qualified to determine when that water is best suited and best needed in those different locations. So rather than involve the whole world in that decision, I would suggest simplifying it and making it those parties be responsible. There's another one, a few more actually, but the PUD, Whatcom County PUD has a large inchoate or unused water right, portion of their water right down at Ferndale. What if they could move that water upstream with the purpose of hydrating tributary streams for the benefit of fish and wildlife and habitat and water quality and all that, and could use that water in those streams where it would then flow back down into the main stem? You'd have some losses due to evaporation and so on. But what if it was determined that the benefit to fish and wildlife was far greater in those tributaries than it is in the main stem? I'm not talking about drying up the main stem, but talking about moving that water right upstream where it can help with stream flow, could possibly help with mitigation for permit-exempt wells and that sort of thing. That's something that's clearly not allowed under the current water code, under the Basin Management Program, the In-Stream Resource Protection Program, but is an idea that I think could make sense. And that kind of gets back to, I think Bill said earlier, you don't have to, let's get away from meeting the in-stream flows, the criteria upon which you judge a solution. Let's see what we can do for the resource. If we can make the resource better, why wouldn't we? So Bellingham also has large water rights, and what if they were willing to move water downstream from the Middle Fork? I understand that it does open up their water rights to scrutiny, but what if they were willing to do that? And what if that could be moved down, similar to the proposal a minute ago, to move water out of the stream in the Middle Basin somewhere to augment stream flows and provide a number of uses. The other possibility is, what if we constructed a series of interties to move water north along the guide meridian? Right now, Bellingham has a 10-inch pipe that runs north along the guide to Smith Road. Deer Creek Water Association has a 10-inch line along the guide meridian north to about East Hemi Road. Guide Meridian Water Association has a 10-inch line that runs north to about Beard Road, where the Pole Road Association has a 12-inch line that runs north to about Harksel. So there's an existing 10 to 12-inch line most of the way from Bellingham to Linden. You'd have to connect them. You'd have to look at water chemistry, heads and pressures and all that stuff. But it seems like that's a possibility to look at as a way of moving water in the county. So I guess the fundamental question I have is, if it appears that the benefits of a water right change, thank you, if a water right change on flow, habitat, and fish production in a tributary stream would outweigh the negative impacts on the main stem, shouldn't that be allowed to occur even if it's not currently allowed? What would be the objection if it simply violates the in-stream flow rule that was adopted in 1986, but it improves the habitat and the fishery resource conditions? Why would you let the fact that rule is in the way keep something that makes sense from happening? So the question is, does a specific proposal make sense to achieve the goals of better water management, or doesn't it? And if it does, why shouldn't we seek changes to let that happen? So the next topic was water banking and water exchanges. And so, really quickly, water banks are just a way to move water around legally and make it available when and where it's not otherwise available. So what if we start water banks in some of the small drainages or in the WIDs, for example, to try it out and see if it works. One of the things it has to do is kind of build trust with the people involved. One concern has always been that farmers, even if they're using water within the terms of their water right, are a little nervous about opening up their water rights to scrutiny by third parties and ecology. And so what if we develop a way of protecting those during that process so that they're not discoverable? So for example, you work through an attorney who makes it attorney-client privilege so that the farmers can put their water rights in for consideration as a water bank deposit and not have them open to the whole world for scrutiny. And then once they pass muster, they can be made more open and available. It's just a way of getting at trying to reduce the kind of fear and nervousness about entering into water banks, where we think they do have a lot of potential to solve a lot of problems. So what if we would provide financial assistance to improve the efficiency of irrigation methods? Kind of what Eric brought up earlier about, and Greg mentioned too, what if we tried to find ways of actually helping fund improvements in irrigation efficiency, both in the research and in the purchase and application of equipment to help with that, and then free up that water for in-stream flows or for other water users. And what if we installed and operated dairy waste processing units, which are being explored here in the county already, where you can generate clean water from the dairy waste and then reduce the volume of the dairy waste that needs to go into the lagoons. And that allows you then to possibly use your storage lagoons to store that water to provide irrigation water during the dry season, so that you don't have to take as much out of the river or out of the ground, and you can then use that to perhaps get another cutting of hay or grass. Aquifer storage, real quickly. I'm getting the stink eye from Becky here. Actually, not stink eyes, just holding up signs. But what if we identify deep aquifer or shallow aquifer storage? I talked to Chuck Lindsay a bit about that, and he said, yeah, that based on his rather impressive local knowledge is that, yeah, there are places where that either of those, deep or shallow storage, could occur. So what if we start really looking at those opportunities and trying to get funding to help study and identify some of those, and also money for implementing those, putting in the actual facilities to store the water? What if we looked at existing lowland lakes and gravel pits, at the possibility of putting water in those during peak flow periods and letting it come out during the low flow period to help with in-stream flows? And the same with wetlands. What if we put water into wetlands and let them use that function? And then large-scale water use. That 1 minute? Okay, large-scale water use. One of the problems with water reuse is that oftentimes the water that's being reclaimed isn't where the demand is. And so with large-scale ones, what if PUD discharge water, not PUD, but industrial discharge water from the PUD system at Cherry Point were recycled back into a holding pond and could be rerun through those industries in whole or in part, which would reduce the withdrawals from the lower Nooksack and improve flows into the estuary? What if Birch Bay and Blaine wastewater could be used for industrial process water at Cherry Point? What if Bellingham's wastewater at their Post Point plant could be used in the Fairhaven area? And what if other municipalities did the same kind of thing? So, habitat and water quality improvements, I think I sort of addressed those with the downstream and upstream potential movements of water. So again, I want to just leave that last caveat again is these are my ideas. If you don't like them, you can disagree with me. Don't disagree with anybody else, because nobody else has had anything to do with this proposal, and I can take it. And so much of what can be done, I think, can be based on common sense. But I'll close with an observation that I've developed over the years just in life generally, and that is, if common sense were really that common, more people would have it. And based on my presentation, I'll let you figure out which category I'm in. So thank you.
I know Jim is not retiring yet, but I am going to miss your jokes when you do. Okay. So it's kind of a nice segue into Jay's presentation, because Jim did mention some things that really require thinking of water law in different ways. And we have asked Jay to come and talk to us about some water law opportunities. I'm not sure he was thinking of it in the same sense of what some of Jim's ideas were, but we're going to see. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay Manning again, and he's going to talk about water law opportunities.
Well, first of all, I want to say we've diminished a little bit, but not bad. And I've done enough speaking to seminars like this that I've actually gone to training for adult seminars as opposed to teaching children. Children have been in school, and they are really used to sitting and listening, or at least appearing to be listening. And adults, on the other hand, are busy, and they run from thing to thing every minute, and sitting and listening to people talk is damn near impossible. So you really have to be on your game as a speaker just to hold any level of attention, and I'm not suggesting that I am on my game, but I'm suggesting that you have been attentive and you've worked hard at it. I know it's not easy. I know all those demands out there are piling up, so thank you so much for staying this long. And I do want to note that the title of this part of the program is Water Law Opportunities, which ought to be up there in the pantheon of oxymorons, because there typically are no opportunities with water law. And I'm not totally joking here. It's a tough area to find flexibility. It's a tough area to work your way through. Not that other environmental regulatory areas are easier, but the overlay of property rights, it makes it significantly more difficult. You have to have the cooperation of the owner of that property. It is a right to use. It's not fee ownership, as I mentioned earlier, but it is a form of ownership. And if you diminish it or take it all together, you get into a discussion about value and paying for it, and that adds a level of difficulty to a lot of the ideas that Jim talked about. I'm sure there are complexities. I'm sure there are, issues that have to be worked through. But I'm betting many of them have lots of merit, and I'm betting that many of them would be quite difficult to accomplish because of the complexities of water law. And that is just a reality, and it is not a reason to not do those things and other creative things. And generally what I've seen are the people who are able to address their significant water problems. And as I mentioned, there are basins that have much bigger water problems than you have. They have sort of forged ahead and done exactly what Jim did with his paper. What makes sense? What should we be doing? How do we address these multiple interests that are not being met right now? How do you develop a plan that meets this pent-up demand from lots of different corners? It's sometimes you can't. Sometimes there's just not enough water to go around, or the water law obstacles are too big. But a lot of times you can, and it's being done. I would suggest also, somewhat in response to Jim, that much of what he talked about, it's happening on the east side of the state. The east side of the state, because the scarcity is more severe there, they launched on this a while ago. When the Office of Columbia River was created within the Department of Ecology in 2006, the mission was go into these basins where there is a tremendous water shortage and figure out ways to create water, and then put some of it in stream and use some of it for out of stream use to meet all these pent up demands. And it isn't perfect. It hasn't totally changed the world, but it has solved some really intractable problems, and it came with $200 million to support the project, and that really helped. And it is the Yakima and its plan came out of that new Office of Columbia River. So there's lessons to be learned there. There's good lessons and negative lessons, and I would suggest learning about what's happening on the east side of the state, what has worked and what hasn't, would be important. So Doug Allen here from Ecology has to leave. We have collected a few questions that we're going to try to talk about. And we're going to address a couple of these to Doug before he leaves. And one of them is it has been presented to us both verbally and in writing, that how can you have this conversation about water and water supply in this basin and not talk about illegal use? That there are significant, large-scale water users that are using water without permits and without certificates, and how can you not talk about that? Okay, we're going to talk about it. I don't know enough to talk about it. I will say that as ecology director, I was aware of it, and we talked about it. We talked about, so what should we do about this? It's unusual. There aren't, what you run across is at the ecology is the water law administrator, the occasional and usually isolated illegal water use. Just not authorized, just somebody using water without a permit, without any argument that they have a water certificate or permit. And but it's not, this is a unique situation up here, and I don't know its origins, but Doug probably does. And Doug, can you tell us just a little bit about what is happening in that situation?
I want to thank Jim for testing one, for all his crazy ideas that many of us have also have talked about. We just don't mention it out loud. So the unpermitted water use in northern part of the county is a long story. Jim, I'm sure I know Jim dealt with it. But in 1992...
We can finish right there. It's Jim's fault.
In 1992, Buck Smith, down in our Northwest Regional Office, came to work for his first day of work. And he went to his boss and said, what should I do? What do you want me to do? I'm here I am, ready to go. And the guy said, check out a car and go up to Whatcom County. And I've heard there's some issues going on, but would you go up and look around? So he drives up here and he goes up to somewhere in one of those northern counties. I won't say anything specific, and sees a field, and he pulls out his map and he looks at it and goes, looks like that one doesn't have a water right. Guess what? It's being irrigated. So he writes that down and goes to the next field. looks like that one doesn't have a water right either. And so then he filled out his map of all the places that were unpermitted and then started contacting people, and something hit the fan. And Terry Hussman was a deputy director at the time, and he came up here. There was a public meeting. It was a big deal, and several things came out of that. One was that that a lot of operators had gone from big gun or wheel line irrigation to drip irrigation because they were converting to raspberries, and then they took the savings from that and went out and irrigated more acres with drip, but they forgot or it was a different thing back then. There's a lot of history, but they did not apply for a water right for some of that. Other people just were irrigating without a permit because they'd never been required to do it before. So there was, so what came out of that was, we said, all right, we're going to try to figure out a way to get some of this stuff legal, permitted. And in the meantime, we want you to, everyone who we've talked to about this, we need you to apply. And so we have a stack of applications. Some are change applications, some are new, and we have tried to work our way through those, and we've had some success. So when I started here as the manager in 2012 and came here in 2004. It was estimated there was anywhere from 30 to 60% unpermitted use in certain areas. And so about that time, the Bertrand WID formed. We started working with Henry and his group, and we started working on trying to find ways to spread water rights legally. And we started looking at ways we could get them additional acres. We looked at how we could move diversions off of streams and into groundwater so that we could reduce the impact on streams. And over the years, we have, I had some really good people working on this for several years and gotten something like 2,000 acres from unpermitted to permitted in that time. We think that by the time in the last year or so, we've got that down to something like 25%. I mean, it's an incremental process. It's difficult. We're still working on it, and there are no easy answers. We will continue to work on it. But we think we can make a lot of progress with this small ball approach. But now we have an opportunity like some of what Jim described. We have some opportunities that we didn't have before. Maybe that's more like a home run, like the city of Bellingham, like the Blaine well field. So we continue to search for solutions, and in the meantime, we've got the WIDs that have been formed. They're willing to work with us. We have some options of maybe doing some more sophisticated kind of water bank work, and that kind of stuff is not only going to help the irrigators, but it's also going to potentially help people that are looking for a water to build a home. So that's the kind of stuff we're doing. And I remember Jay came up in 2006 when we were working on combined out-of-stream uses and treaty rights. And first place we started working was in Bertrand, and Jay said, if you guys figure this out, I'll buy the beer. So I hope you're still holding on to that.
There was a time limit, sorry. So I know we're running into our time to take questions, but I want to just talk for a minute about this pending Hearst legislation. And I think there are people in this room who really like the Hearst decision and think it doesn't need to be changed. There are people in this room who really hate the Hearst decision and want it to be changed. My view is, first of all, I will tell you, I think exempt wells are an anachronism that may have made sense in 1945 and don't make sense today. And if we got rid of the exemption, it would hurt. It would be painful. and it's the right thing to do, and we should do that. And we will do it eventually, because it's going to cause more problems than it solves in the longer run as competition gets more intense and the resource gets more limited. Feel pretty confident about that, but I understand there are people in the room who disagree. In the meantime, I am convinced the legislature is going to pass a Hearst bill, and trying to hold on to the Hearst bill for dear life, or the Hearst decision for dear life, without getting engaged in the legislative process and trying to get some good out of a Hearst bill is a mistake, in my opinion. And so I have engaged personally in the discussion about the Hearst bill, and I've suggested that we're focused on molecules, the impact of exempt wells, when we should be focused on CFS. We're focused on mitigating the impact of wells when we should be focused on restoring streams so they support harvestable levels of salmon. That is our obligation in this state, and we ought to be taking that seriously. And that's going to require CFS, not molecules. My guess is the impact of development, of losing impervious surfaces, losing vegetated cover and replacing it with impervious surfaces, has more of an impact on stream flow than exempt wells, or at least an equal impact, and we pretty much ignore that. So in my opinion, we ought to be focused on limiting the impact of exempt wells, which the Hearst bill does in part of the state. Limits it from 5,000 gallons a day down to a much lower number, somewhere between 350 and 500. I think that's positive. It would require the infiltration of runoff on property in a more aggressive way than is currently done. I think that's a positive. I think it requires a fee, so there's an amount of money for local government and the state to try to deal with this. But the state infuses $200 million in flow restoration dollars over 10 years to try to meet that larger flow restoration goal. And I think on balance, it's not perfect. I think it needs some improvements, but I think that's a worthwhile bill. I think people here who care about salmon and the future of the Nooksack, and reaching that balance between out-of-stream and in-stream uses, I think you ought to be supporting that bill as opposed to opposing it. But that's my opinion, and I understand that people have different opinions about that. And if it's about stopping growth or slowing growth or restricting growth, that's what the GMA is in part about, directing growth to the right place. It isn't about stopping growth. And if that's the objective, Hearst isn't going to get you there. The Hearst case is going to be changed by the legislature. Pretty sure that's going to happen, and I think we ought to get in there and get everything we can to protect water resources and bring salmon back in the Puget Sound Basin and in the Nooksack as the price of, quote, fixing Hearst. And I'll go back one separate recommendation to all of you. There's going to be money available. There is money available to do the kind of work you're thinking about here, that you've embarked on, but it's limited. And the people who get in line first are going to have a leg up on those who come later. So getting in line for the real money it's going to take to build the infrastructure, to rebuild flows, it is in your interest to get in line early. And that would require putting that plan together that people, the critical people in this room, agree to and support in the legislature. Foster, there's a foster part. It's not a fix for foster. It's a study and a set of recommendations with regard to what to do about foster. There will be some pilot programs authorized, most likely as part of that foster language. If you want to be a pilot test to demonstrate how foster mitigation could work, start lining that up now, because that's going to be really limited, probably just a couple, 2 or 3, and if you want to be in that queue, you probably have to start putting together your proposal now and be ready to move it forward. So I'll stop there. We're getting some time for questions to Jim and Doug and me. Doug, stay as long as you want. And yes, question.
Hi. My question is for you, Jake. As we have seen several times here today in the maps, approximately half of the rural land in Whatcom County is not served by water systems. So how can you say private wells are an anachronism? How are those properties going to get water if they can't do it through private wells?
I didn't say eliminate private wells. I said eliminate the exemption.
Eliminate the exemption. So it would simply cost more to use private wells or to establish them?
You'd have to meet the 4-part test like every other water right.
Hi, thank you very much for giving that summary of some of the high points of this, what the committee discussed yesterday in Olympia. I wasn't clear, and I was hoping you might know about how getting all the stakeholders involved. You talked about it a little bit, but like I'm part of a well owners, so I wasn't sure how they're getting involved in the discussions, and I'm sure there's other groups like forestry. How are all the stakeholders getting involved?
In the legislative debate.
Yeah, on forming this bill.
Well, Bill Clark is here. He has represented a couple different groups that are involved in that discussion, so Bill might be able to answer better than me. My sense is, like any important piece of legislation, it has attracted a number of interest groups ranging, in this case, from builders to realtors to cities to counties to tribes to state government and many others, and they're all sort of gravitating into that conversation. It has been sort of a closed discussion that just a few legislators were having private discussions, but now the public discussion has started with the hearing yesterday, and there will be more public discussion and public testimony opportunities in the early part of this session. I don't think anything's scheduled yet, but they will be scheduled. This is something that it would be smart, I think, to talk to your own legislator and let them know what your views are, what your position is. And if you really want to get involved, come down to Olympia, come to the hearing, and make your position. Anybody can show up and sign in and testify at a legislative hearing. And when real people show up, as opposed to people like me or people like Bill, who somebody might be paying us to be there, they really get listened to. It's not that common. And so I encourage you to come down and be part of that process.
One of the questions yesterday was, we have like a WIRA 1 and other, I don't know how many groups, like Gary showed, involved in water, and this new plan versus we have old plans. And is there any way to use the old plans versus spending more money on this new proposal?
Well, the plans that are envisioned by this bill, the Hearst bill, is a really specific idea, which is flow restoration. Now, I do think many existing watershed plans address that. So I think to a certain extent, yes, existing work product and plans can be used. You should not start from scratch if you have that already. And there's been a fair amount of work in basins across the state to restore stream flow. I think it's been demonstrated that it can be done. Most of that has been on the east side of the state. So not as much on the west side. And that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think there's going to be real money available. So again, getting in line and getting in early and using the work product that if you have flow restoration components in the plan, or you have a set of ideas that we just heard about, and I know there are other ideas. People ought to be getting together and thinking that through, and put the raw material together so that when and if the bill passes, then these local flow restoration committees are formed. That you'll be ready with. We got 25 things on our list that we can look at. That they may not all shake out to be feasible, but some of them almost certainly will. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Does the flow restoration discussions that are occurring around Hearst include blockage removal, culverts and fish blockage removal at all, or?
No.
Okay.
It's about flow. It's about volume.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, I think that's actually, Bill, that's an interesting question. It is about, but if you had, you could build up all this volume and it's all, sort of worthless because there's this blockage. I think that's an interesting question, whether that could be eligible for funding. It probably could be. Okay? Thank you.